Here we are back at the shop, and I've got some projects to work on. Now that I've got two cars to work on, I'm going to have to make sure that I relegate my time correctly and do things that need to be done and get them finalized. With that being said, as far as electrical wiring, not happy with it. Just not happy with it. There's a lot better that I can do, and I think I've come up with a solution to that. I'm back today, and I'm going to work on Petty Chevy's electrical system, jumping back against two things that I've already said, that the electrical was done and that Petty Chevy was hibernating, but that's not the case. I've got some stuff to do, and I'm going to show you what it is. So as you might have seen before, this is the base setup for the electrical on Petty Chevy. It's not bad considering what it was as well. I've got my quick disconnect for my battery cable set up here, a positive wire running off of that to the junction block so I can feed all of my lights and accessories and of the sort. However, I've just really never been super happy with this, especially because where the junction block is, I had that strap steel on there and the welds were not great. I just think that this is a lot of wiring to have to run from the back of the car to the front of the car and then the back of the car again, because these wires run for positive and negative on the car. And I just think that I can use that junction block a lot more sophisticated in a better way. And I also don't like how my kill switch setup is. I don't like how all these wires are just kind of hanging out on the back. I just think I can do a much better job. And I think I have a solution for that. So what I've come up with is I was able to find this 8-switch panel system, which hopefully will give me the ability to hook everything up to the switch panel, which will also be a little more high-tech looking. As far as the switch panel itself, it's very small. It has 8 inputs and outputs, or 8 controller circuits on it. It has its own standalone fuse box in here. It has its own cabling system. It has its own circuit breaker even, which just gives me even more protection. So there's a couple things I'm going to have to figure out on how to wire this up. It did come with some instructions and wiring diagrams. I'm just going to have a big think on that. But to be able to do that, I'm going to have to run, or I would like to run, a positive cable and possibly a negative cable from the battery all the way underneath here, so I can try and clean up all of this wiring that I have as far as all my harnesses running back there. I think that doesn't look too great. And I might be able to run them up into the cabin where everything's a little more serviceable as far as that fuse panel and junction block. Easier to get to right there. And that's also going to mean I'm going to have to rework this entire dash panel too. I do have a new dash panel that I picked up that already has holes for gauges, has a hole for a tachometer. I don't know if that tachometer works. I hope it does, because the other one doesn't work too well. I'm basically going to be tearing apart all of the electronics. Again, all of the wiring. I'm going to be redoing it. It's quite a hassle, but I do want Petty Chevy to be done well. And again, this is my learning project. This is how I'm going to try things out, see what they work, try different products, see what works well for the budget. This was rather inexpensive switch panel kit. I did see some that were double the price, but looking at them, they were the exact same thing. Exactly the same thing. And I did have them off of Amazon, which I'm not terribly comfortable buying stuff off of Amazon, because anybody can sell anything on Amazon in any condition or quality and ask whatever they want. But it seems to be an inexpensive option as far as doing it the way that I want to, which is going to help me, because right now nobody's paying for this car but me. So I'm going to give that a shot. I'm going to work on getting all of the electrics sorted a little better. This probably isn't going to be a one-day ordeal, but I'm going to get as far as I think I can today, which hopefully is going to be setting up the positive and negative wires and the junction block, and then I'll work on getting all of the accessories hooked up to that junction block once I figure it out. Alright folks, here is a quick behind the scenes of the wiring the way it was set up. But this is the basic wiring that I have set up. It's a good place to start to have proved all my circuits. However, I don't think it's a great place to end. I can do it better. And what I ended up having to do after I blew out all those fuses before and didn't disconnect my power before I serviced everything, blew up my fuel pump switch and my fan switch, is I had to remake the whole switch panel. This is not that great either. What I'm thinking is I can control the fuel pump and the fans and the, well, I'm sorry, this is ignition, fuel pump, fans. I think I can control all of that off of that new switch panel that I bought, and then I'm going to retain starter button separate because I don't want all that amperage running through that starter panel. So that's what we're going to get started on. I've just got to try and figure out the circuits first before I tear anything any further apart, but all of this hopefully will get cleaned up much better. So this is everything that comes in the 8 switch panel system universal. Yeah, it's Amazon for you. I've got a bracket to mount the fuse block to, a couple of other different mounting brackets of hardware. I've got the control panel itself, a control harness that goes from the control panel in what looks like a 4-pin connector to another 4-pin connector on here that then mates out to the fuse block itself. The fuse block has a positive and negative hookup that I'm probably going to hook up to my power cables that I'm going to run. Different power cables for hooking that up. Some other kind of jumper wire that may be for this circuit breaker. Instructions, another wire that I don't know what it does just yet. I'll figure it out. But then specifically, it comes with an assortment of different stickers that you can put on the control panel itself. Now, this is one of the primary reasons why I wanted to buy this kit, is because it has all of these stickers as opposed to buying a gang of rocker switch panels that you have to know exactly what you're going to be using them for. So you would have to make the decision of, well, this is exactly what I'm going to run, and I'm not exactly sure what I want to run through a rocker switch panel yet. So this gives me that ability to figure it out in my head, and once I figure it out, hopefully I have enough corresponding stickers to get everything on there and labeled in a much cleaner way than it is in there now. And as of right now, I'm just going through and I'm tearing out all the wires so I can identify them again, get an idea in my head of how exactly I'm going to do this, and get started on the electrical again. Story time. Okay, update. So here is the situation I find myself in. I started to make drawings of the current circuits and the current electrical, so I had somewhat of a good idea of what to go back to, or at least how everything came, along with the circuit diagram that I already have. This is kind of like how everything was set up. The battery had a positive feed to a quick disconnect, which then fed to the junction box, which also fed to the starter solenoid, and then that had a power jumper or wires in the harness that went for ignition and for like secondary power. There was the yellow signal wire that went up after it intercepted everything in this bird's nest out in here and would come back to the car to the starter solenoid. Then the gray wire would run all the way back up the car to the starter. And then we have on the negative side, everything that would be hooked up to my negative ran from the final junction back to the kill switch, and then the kill switch was hooked up to the battery and intercepted on the chassis. So everything that ran to one side, which I think this pole is actually on the chassis side, because this is the main ground back to everything on the battery. So that's what I kind of had going on, and this is what that has resulted in. I have completely torn out the entire wiring harness. This is the main power feed wire up to the ignition, I believe. This is a secondary power wire. This was the starter signal wire in yellow. Everything's draped out, pulled out of the car entirely. Starter cable is still here. The fuel pump wire is separated from the rest of the harness. It's still back there hooked up to the fuel pump. The lighting harnesses that I put in are out. The other lighting harnesses for the road shock lights are still in. I'm going to leave them in for now because I don't know exactly what I'm going to do with them. But my game plan is I'm going to run a main power wire from the battery to the junction block and have the junction block somewhere in the cabin. That way I have less wires running back and forth, back and forth, back and forth underneath the end of the car. The other thing I'm trying to figure out is I want to move the starter solenoid, which I have here, somewhere. I'm thinking down there. What I'd like to do, pardon my hand and my reach, and you might not be able to really see. What I'd like to do is put it somewhere there so I can have, ideally I want to have the junction block somewhere back in here, run a power wire through to the starter down here, and then have the signal wire come through as well, and then the main starter wire just come up here and then jump right over. That'll shorten my wires, that'll make it a little more simple because I know then if I have any issues, alright, I just have to get into the junction block, which would be under the cab, which I can get in here pretty easily. As opposed to in the back, the closeout panels are going to be there. They are going to be set up serviceable, but it is a hard reach. So that's what I'm working on. Hopefully, I'll be able to make that work. Before I leave, I'd like to try and figure out how to have my junction block and power to the junction block, and then I'll go from there. Now the first step into really making all of this work is I'm going to need to run a power wire from the back of the car all the way up to the front. What I was able to do was find some 4 American wire gauge power cable. I did put in for automotive battery cable, but what came back is this stranded copper wire. All battery cable is stranded copper wire, but it's got the translucent sheathing, which is not necessarily ideal. A lot of people will recognize this as for audio systems, is where it's typically used. But as far as the American wire gauge on it, I don't really see much of a difference. I don't really know. We're going to find out. If this doesn't work, no bueno. I'll just have to find something that's not from Amazon. So to make all of that really work, I've got the cable, I've got the battery lugs that I need so that I can run everything to the front of the car. And to crimp those battery cables, I got a hydraulic crimping tool. So we're going to be trying out a new tool today. I'm not necessarily going to show you how to use it. I'm going to learn first, and then I'm just going to show you me using it, basically. So what this does, there are dies that sit in here, and as you crimp everything, the dies will move. I don't know if you can really see that. It's not really showing too much. But there'll be another die in here, and as they move, they will crimp together and make that battery cable connection. So that's what I'm going to work on now, is measuring out my battery cable, getting my ends crimped, and hopefully installed. First impressions of the hydraulic wire crimping tool. Makes a really good crimp. So what you do is you put the eye lug inside of the crimping tool, and then you set the tension and you start crimping. It's great. Looks pretty good. Only thing that sucks for me is I did not have any heat shrink that was big enough. I'm gonna have to go with the old electrical tape to seal the end. Not ideal, but it'll work. It works all the time anyway. So that's what I'm gonna go ahead and do now. Looks good enough. It's not haggard. It's not great. I'd prefer heat shrink, but I don't have it. So, moving on. So after crimping that end, I have to just marry everything to my quick disconnect. I'm going to go ahead and hook that up now. get it installed, and then once that's installed, I'll figure out the actual run length that I'm going to need for the rest of the battery cable. Cut it down, and then crimp that end, and I'll show you guys me crimping that end. If I can figure out how to get this nut on here and get started. That's what she said. There we go. Alright, I've got that relatively tight for now, and I've got it offset because I'm going to have my quick disconnect so I can still roll it onto the battery post and make it easier that way, and then everything go along the rest of the body. Now I'm just going to do that and then measure my length and get back to work. Okay, so, update. Got my power cable ran, zip tied in for now, maybe permanently, I'm not sure. As far as where the power cable comes up to here. And then right now I just have it draped over. What my plan is, I've moved the junction box to the firewall here. I'm gonna bring my power in to this pole here. I also have my rocker switch panel cable here, and then I have my starter signal, or my starter power wire cable here. Why? Because I moved my starter solenoid into the cabin. It's an easier place to work on and access than in the back. I'm planning on running my wire there, and then my control box somewhere here. Not sure about that yet, but that's where I'm at so far. So I've got my junction box moved up forward in the cabin for easier access. Same thing with the starter solenoid. Okay, so after another full day back at it, I have yet another wiring mess. But here's what I have. I have my main wire coming in here on red, going to my junction block. Then I have that power feed going to the starter solenoid. Then I have a circuit breaker box that they provided with the kit installed in front of the starter solenoid. There is a jumper wire that goes from the main power feed to the circuit breaker. I know it's really hard to see. Then from the circuit breaker follows along here. I am going to leave this exposed because it is the cyber build, so I'm going to leave a little bit of electrical cabling exposed. That goes in to the main power feed. And then there's a negative that goes all the way up here, up onto the negative side of the junction. Most of these wires, I know what they are. I've got my fans here. My fans are plumbed into the second slot. I've got my fuel pump. I've got fuel pump and fans picking up power. And then fuel pump and fans. I've got the black fuel pump output going back down the wire harness here. I have the fan output going out to the fans. So that's where I'm at so far. But it's yet another wiring mess that I will get sorted out. But I also do have my starter signal wire hooked up, and my starter cable ran back through the cable and hooked up to the solenoid. So we're getting there, but this is another full day and more to come.